Welcome to Phoenix Live. Thank you for tuning in. Today we're going to be talking for a little while about wounds and being wounded and how that can turn you into what I would call a wounder, and how from these wounds, which everybody experiences in life, you can heal. And from that point you are enabled to be a healer. And, there's a lot of talk these days about narcissism. You hear that term being thrown around all the time, whether the typical overt narcissism and the obvious toxic masculine narcissism, or the less common, but increasingly people are becoming aware of it, covert or sensitive or vulnerable narcissist, which is the toxic feminine. And I've done a lot of thought on that matter. You could say after all the relationships I've had, I could write a thesis on it. And I've learned that a better term than putting it in a box and calling it narcissism, is to simply acknowledge, really at the heart, and really at the core of why people act and behave narcissistically, regardless of what end of the spectrum they're on. And to me, after lots of contemplation and deliberation, it was clear that the source of it are wounds. The wounds that we carry inside. And really, I think a better term for toxic masculine, overt narcissism is the wounded masculine that never healed and so therefore wounds others in a toxic way. And the covert narcissism being the wounded feminine that was never healed sufficiently and therefore wounds other people. And that's the thing. The way this world works is whatever's inside of us we project out. We can only recognize in other people that which we first cognize within ourselves to be true, those beliefs that we hold. That shapes very much so the appearance of the show in the outside world and how things appear to us. Whatever we believe in our heart, whether we come from a place of wounds and fear and anger and resent and rejection, or whether we come from a place of love and understanding and openness and vulnerability, surrender, acceptance, and understanding. Did I say understanding? Anyway. So recently, things have been very tumultuous. There's been a lot of different situations that my partner and I and coming child have been involved in. It's put a lot of tension on us, and this isn't new for us. Since the beginning, there's been shifting grounds. Every time we get stable in one place, everything starts getting just out of control, and then we shift, and then it happens again. And, when you're subjected to pressures in life, there's this thing called transference, where because we're feeling stressed from, let's say, a day at work that didn't go too well, or whatever it is, we then might return home to our family or to our friends or whoever, and take out that energy, take out that sense of feeling like a good for nothing, not good at my job, always getting judged and berated, or taking that feeling of jealousy because someone else got a promotion, or taking, whether it's a sense of insecurity or inadequacy or just something bad happened, you just feel angry, and we go home and we take out that anger. Somebody says something that might possibly be taken away to seem like it's diminishing our worth, challenging our security, undermining our capability, and make us feel like inadequate. And then we react to those things as if that person is fully doing that. And really what we're doing is we're arguing with, and we're abusing, and we're taking out these feelings onto this person that were actually caused by this person or this situation or these people. And sometimes, a lot of the time, I'd say that when it comes to our emotional landscape, we actually time travel, and we are rarely absolutely present enough to truly be reacting to what is happening now. And even if we were present, who is to say that we have a clear, 100% accurate depiction of what is going on at any given point? We might be so present and have a closer resonance and be more accurate in understanding what is unfolding around us with other people and events. But our own way of interpreting information and making it make sense to us is so radically different from every single individual in this world that even though you might have 20 people in the same event, each person will have a different set of thoughts and feelings, a different narrative as to how that event unfolded. Each person will take different things from it, give different things to it. And, even when people are giving us things, the thing we are receiving when we receive something is rarely the exact same thing that the person has actually given us. Somebody might write you you might have written, let's say, a poem to somebody, and you put so much intention, and there might be a few particular lines that are relevant to some things that happened between you and your partner, let's say, like a long time ago, and you're like, this is so special, my partner's going to love this poem. And then you share it, the poem or the song, and the person's like, oh yeah, this is cool, and they don't notice the bits that you put so much intention into. They don't notice those little bits that are talking about, referring to these things that happened in the past and shows that you remember and that it matters. But they might find one line that like rhymes or something. It sounds cool, and they say, "Oh, I like this bit. I really like this bit." And you're just like, "Thanks, but fuck, like that's not the bit that I wanted to really make a connect with." And I kind of feel like you're missing the real heart of the piece. So this is what I mean. Like, you might have an intention in what you're giving to somebody, but how they receive it and what it means for them is always different. And in this sense, there is no such a thing as requited love. There's no such thing as receiving and that love that's returning to you, being requited, being the same as the love that you're giving. Because each person is taking that love differently. That love that you're giving, that is this to you, is actually that to them. And it's always different. And the love that they're giving to you and intending is always going to be that to them and this to you. And so we're always receiving these expressions from people, these gestures. But the impressions that they make is very much reliant on our past experiences, the way we are taught to define meaning, and all of this. So we're really reacting to our past. We're really reacting to our learned conditioning, to all the experiences we've had that helped us relate to meaning, to relate to words as well. And so when we are reacting in any given moment, we are reacting to our past as it is being mirrored to us through similar expressions, similar stimulus, similar things happening. It's still unique, it's still completely original and different, and it deserves a unique and completely original response. But because it reminds us of something in the past, we just react with the same old, whether it's embracing and reacting with an embrace like that was nice, or whether it's rejecting out of fear. And the point of this talk is to talk about wounds and healing. And I think going back to the narcissism thing, there's no such thing as, when psychologists draw up these maps, and I call them maps because they help us relate to people. In the case of psychology, they helps us have an interface that we can use to navigate the terrain of other people's psychology and understand the park of their being, and understand why this is here and why that behavior is there and that way of thinking is here. It's an interface, it's a map to help us navigate and understand. It's not a closed box, it's not a closed diagnosis. These are just words referencing to reality, to what people call reality, but they're just maps. And I think people mistake the map for being the territory. They think that because I've been diagnosed with this, or because I've been taught that this is what a man is or a woman is, when I look at my own territory of who I actually am and what I look like, this map, this interface designed for people to communicate and connect and navigate through me, this map doesn't align with me. This map doesn't fit with my territory. And then sometimes people will go about deforming their territory. Hi Sam, how you doing? People will go about changing their territory in order to suit the map and match it, as opposed to doing it the other way around. Okay? Sorry, I'm just going to do something. Okay, so keeping that in mind, that narcissism is just a map, but I would think a more healthier way to relate to the phenomena, to the reality that narcissism is referring to, is to call it, like I said, wounded feminine and wounded masculine. Covert narcissism, overt narcissism. And when you understand that the reasons why we hurt each other, the reasons why we abuse and reject and get angry or even afraid, more often than not, is because of our past wounds that we haven't healed. And this is the core of the point of this message right now. That the difference, because we all experience trauma, we all experience shit in life that affects us in a toxic way. We are all subjected to it. The difference between somebody who moves beyond all that and is still in the space of healing and love, and the difference between somebody who is so wounded that they've become deformed or corrupt or toxic, and now therefore they're now abusing other people because they've been so abused, so wounded, they are now acting like wounders and they're wounding other people. The difference is healing. If you get hurt, you break a leg, and you don't have the tools by yourself to help yourself get better, you've got to still, wash your clothes and cook food and tidy the house and even work, whatever. If you don't have the tools, if you can't just snap your finger and make your leg better again, it's going to be a painful process. It's going to be a lot of bother, a lot of stress. And if you're doing it alone, if you don't even have help from the outside, it's bad enough that you don't have the tools by yourself to help heal yourself. But if you don't have anyone else to help fashion a crutch or show you what a crutch is so you can fashion one yourself, help support you while your leg heals, help do some of that work for you, just be supportive, then you can imagine that through that whole process of healing your broken leg and forcing yourself through the pain and discomfort to do everything you need to do to keep alive and keep things going, you can imagine so much that you would have this feeling of resent, this feeling of being abandoned or alone in your misery and nobody else understanding or caring or being there. Whereas if you look at the other way, let's say you break a leg and you do know what to do, then you can heal yourself and you won't have those feelings. Or somebody else comes into the picture and helps you. They acknowledge that you right now need support because you are debilitated. Your ability is debilitated. You don't have the ability to look after yourself as much. So they look after you a little bit. They help you. And then this will foster feelings of, wow, okay, people are there. People care. And you will heal. You will heal much faster too. And this is what I think is the source of narcissism and abusive behavior and toxic, corrupt expressions in form. Is when we sustain these injuries. And not just physical, but more so mental trauma, emotional trauma and hurt and pain, spiritual suffering and anguish and a sense of just things not being right and rejecting, but being subjected to things that your soul knows is wrong, but it's powerless to do anything at that point in time. And this happens so much when we get wounded, when we feel this trauma and toxicity. And if you're not in the space to help yourself, if you're not in the space to heal yourself, and if you don't have anyone there to help you, to even show you how to use the tools by yourself to help yourself, and they're not even offering a hand, then after a while, when you stay in that space of debilitation and pain and anguish, this creates a toxic frame of thinking, a toxic way of thinking and relating. It breeds resent. It breeds this idea that, well, everyone's in it for themselves. No one's there for me. Why should I be there for anyone else? People will let me sit in my pain. Why should I care if I cause pain to anyone else? If you sit in pain long enough, if you sit in your wounds long enough, and nobody helps lift you up and out of your wounds, guess what's going to happen? Your wounds are going to slowly grow over you, and you will be sealed within your own wounds. And that's when you become sealed within wounds, if you know what I'm talking about, that's when you become a wound. When you identify with pain and loss and anguish long enough, you become pain. You become loss and you become anguish. Or you become rejection. You become anger. So when you're abused long enough, you've been subjected to just horrible situations. You didn't know how to help yourself. Nobody was there to teach you or help you. That pain, that chaos, it seals over you and it becomes part of your identity. Because you never healed yourself beyond it. So it's still there. And after a while, if you adapt to that as just being, well, that's just the way it is. This is my new normal. My new normal of feeling unsettled and traumatized with a broken leg that never really formed back properly because I didn't know how. I didn't have help. Then that's when you become corrupt. So to me, the solution to narcissism, abusive behavior, toxic ways of thinking, feeling, expressing, is to focus on healing. Because we all get wounded, and the difference between a healer and a wounder is not somebody that's never been wounded. The difference is somebody who's been wounded but healed from it, that allowed themselves to step into that space, that were enabled the possibility of stepping into that space of healing by themselves or with other people. And if you heal beyond it, then you move into deeper levels of love and growth and awareness and compassion, because now you can relate to people that are in similar situations to you. Except the difference is you healed yourself and you alighted and you became light, a light, be light, so that you can see light, so that you can delight. You got to alight from toxicity. You got to move away and depart from the darkness and the chaos in your life. When it gets too much and it's not helping you grow, you got to alight so that you can be light. Move into a space of light that you've alighted to so you can be light. And once you be light, then you are able to see light and have faith and know that there is love out there and support. And then you can delight. And when we stay in the dark too long and the toxicity and the wounds seal over us, it can be very hard to open up those wounds again. Once they've sealed over, it's like scar tissue. It can be very painful to reopen that wound, to confront that, so that we can remove ourselves and heal ourselves above our wounds. You with me? And that's really the core of it. I really, I don't look at people anymore and add to the fire and say, I reject you because you're a narcissist. Instead, I think, oh, if you're an overt narcissist, I'd be like, oh, your masculine is wounded. Okay? If you're a covert narcissist, I'll say, oh, your feminine is wounded. And I'll try to figure out how I can help to heal that wound, or that set of wounds. That's in the feminine, the masculine, maybe both. Typically both, because they're not like completely separate, right? And I think that's a much healthier way. And the title of this video was talking about presence, and I want to bring this point in now for the second part of this presentation, which is coming to a close soon, so bear with me. The relevance of presence. The relevance of being present to your healing, so that your wounds don't heal over you and you get trapped inside your pain, inside your trauma. The relevance of presence is so significant to your healing, and allow me to explain why. So as I said, my partner and I have been having hard times. We've been transferring a lot of frustration, feelings of rejection, feelings of not being supported enough, and all of those negative feelings that results from that. We've been throwing it at each other, and we've been causing so much damage that, my partner, just like a lot of people, and myself included, we all come into every relationship, not with baggage, but we are baggage. We are baggage, and we hold all of these experiences from our past, all of these traumas and all the good things, we hold it inside of us and we take it around with us. So we are the baggage. And it's a matter of choosing what you want to remove and what you want to keep inside yourself. So my partner has been subjected to narcissistic behavior or toxic masculine behavior. So when we are subjected to this abuse, we have coping mechanisms. We put up walls. Sometimes we'll attach turrets to the walls and be offensive and shoot people away whenever we feel triggered and sensitive and vulnerable. And the more we put up these walls and develop these coping mechanisms around ourselves, the harder it is to be present. The more you're in a fight or flight position, freeze, fight, or flight, the harder it is to truly be aware of everything that's happening now. You're not reacting with fear and stress to what hasn't happened yet in the future. You're not reacting with fear or stress about something that happened in the past. When you are present, you're just perceiving all the open possibilities of what you are able to do right now, on what is actually being provided for you already right now. And you can't see that if you've got walls up, if you've got these coping mechanisms. Being in a fight and flight space, you can't be vulnerable and surrendered to the present. And I say that presence, being present, being in that space right now, not the future, not the past, now, is where true healing is achieved. And it just unfolds naturally. Most of the time, the traumas we have in our head, the fears we have in our head, 99% of those fears, those things causing us so much stress, 99% are shadows, just growing shadows of the actual cause of those fears, the original incident, the original event. And really, it's not so much the event that traumatizes us. It's how we lend our thoughts and our energy and our power after the event, after the trauma, when we keep fixating and we keep telling ourselves, you poor thing, and we talk with people, yeah, it's not right, yes, you got to talk, you got to release, you got to share, and that helps. But there's a difference between sharing and releasing and sitting in an echo chamber of trauma reverberating around you, a sob story, a victim narrative, whatever you want to call it. There's a difference between fixating and dwelling in the past or the future, worrying about what hasn't happened yet, and feeling deeply disconnected and jolted by constantly fixating on the past traumas. Okay? Because the more you do that, you're not going to be present. And you're only going to keep building those walls up. You're only going to keep seeing all the evidence that there is reason to not trust people, to be suspicious, to fear that they're going to put their interests above your interests and even exploit or abuse or use or neglect or harm you. If you keep feeding these bad things that have happened to you and consolidating them and building them as foundations, then your perception right now, you're not going to see all of what's possible. You're not going to really truly see what's being provided to you and what it actually is and what people are actually trying to do for you. You're only going to see whatever you can erect on this foundation that you've consolidated of trauma and fear and pain. And you're going to only see the things that you can possibly interpret. Maybe sometimes you even have to exaggerate or distort or completely confabulate and create the stories of what people are doing, because you've trained yourself to build your perception upon a foundation of fear and pain and trauma. And so now you're only seeking, with confirmation bias, you're only seeing, and you're limited to seeing, and even imagining evidence in how people are acting and what's happening in your life, evidence to support your belief that you are not being supported, that you are not being cared for or loved enough, or that you are even being abused or disregarded. Okay? So that's one part of the healing, that if you've entered into a dispute, I wish with my partner, before things got so bad, before we hurt each other so much, because of all the stresses in our world, I wish we put systems in place that every time we feel triggered and we feel like, something's happened or something's been said and it's removed us from being present and in harmony and surrender and vulnerability and peace and love and openness, not closed protection and fear, but open love and reception and understanding and acceptance. Every time we're moved out of that space into that fight-flight mode, I wish we allowed ourselves to flight more, or to take a moment to go somewhere else, to do something else, to connect with someone else that would allow us to be present again. Because this is the thing. The power of novelty, something new, something fresh, cannot be understated. stated. You will notice when you're dating people, especially when you really get to know people like on that deeper, intimate level, and you learn of the stuff that they are holding inside themselves as baggage, that some people come into a relationship and they've got more wounds than they can actually balance with the amount of healing they've achieved. Okay, so everyone's got wounds that are unhealed, but the difference is to somebody who can face a trauma, a crisis, a conflict, and respond in a way that is progressive and level-headed, even if that means departing for a moment to collect yourself and center yourself and then return and respond in a progressive way. Those people, if you imagine like a scale, they're probably past the 50% mark towards the 100% mark. They're probably over halfway of healing a lot of their traumas. But if you've got less than 50% towards 0% healing achieved, and you've got more trauma that you've experienced than you've ever had the capacity or the support to help you heal from, then you're always going to react with fight, flight, or freeze. And you're going to stay in that modality of fear, and you're going to be reactive, not responsive. Not, okay, I acknowledge this is triggering me, but I've healed enough that I'm not just going to fully react. I'm going to just take a moment and decide what's the best thing to do. I'm going to take a moment to collect myself and then make a decision. If you've got more pain, when you get triggered, all that pain, all of that rejection, all of that, fuck you for not being there for me, all of those feelings come up. And it's very hard to respond in a progressive fashion. Instead, you will react in a way that is regressive. It regresses back and it repeats the old narrative, the way things used to be. It repeats the same situations, the same responses, the same way of triggering other people to respond a certain way. And then that's going to just recreate the same experiences you've had before, because you've got more wounds than you have healing. Okay? So the power of novelty. Why do I bring up the power of novelty a moment ago? I believe in my experience that sometimes a person needs to move from relationship to relationship. And maybe not even move from like a romantic relationship, but I mean that people need to experience a variety of connection. And you can have a relationship not just with people. You can have a relationship with animals, you can with trees, hug a tree. You can have relationships with cooking as a process of connection, connecting with the food, with Gaia, preparing food in a ritualistic fashion to consume. You can connect with painting or any form of art or creation of music, and that's connecting with your own inner divinity and expressing it and connecting with Source directly, which is powerful for healing. And have you ever really played a guitar or played drums or done a painting or even cooking food? How often do you recall when you're doing those things where you're really immersed and meditative and connecting with it and expressing or just doing the thing? How often can you recall being in your head and worrying about the future, stressing yourself, and traumatizing yourself about the past, when you're in the middle of doing something which you are completely immersed in and which makes you present? So I firmly believe that when people have their traumas and they move into a relationship, when you move into a new relationship, the novelty of that, the fact that it's something new, this completely fresh person to explore, it's like a new land to explore. It's exciting, it's full of mystery and intrigue, it creates enthusiasm. And that level of excitement, that level of awe and wonder and enthusiasm and passion in the beginning of relationships, even if you are very traumatized, that can still, and you come from fear usually, that novelty itself, the power of novelty, can anchor you into the present moment. But then what happens when that novelty starts to wear off? What happens, as the old axiom goes, familiarity breeds contempt. What happens when something starts to become familiar? It's no longer fresh, you're no longer present, you're no longer seeing it for what it is. It's starting to become more familiar. That's when people talk about the honeymoon period being over. People aren't on their best behavior anymore. It's not even that people are on their best behavior. I believe it's that when people enter into a relationship, they're not trying to be a different way, maybe a little bit, but I think the bigger part of it is that novelty, the fact that it's something new and exciting, is overwhelming their ability to worry about the future and the past. They're so wrapped up in the present. How many times have you been lost in a relationship, a new relationship with a lover, and you're so caught up and immersed in it that you stop connecting with other friends, you stop returning calls and messages. It's not because you're on your best behavior, because if you were, you would respond to your friends. It's because you were so immersed in this and you're so present in it. It's like tunnel vision. Everything else is going out, okay? Because of that excitement. Nothing to do with best behavior, I don't think. And when that excitement and the novelty wears off and things become more familiar, familiarity breeds contempt. Familiarity breeds aversion. Aversion, feeling like, aversive. No thanks. Aversive to something. The more familiar something becomes, the less we feel pulled by the novelty and that energy to be anchored in the present, and the more we start going back into our old ways of behaving, into our old ways of thinking. The more we go back into the future or the past, and we're no longer anchored in the present. So I think when we start our relationships, and this is for people that have got so much trauma that they find themselves entering relationships where everything is great, and then the same things end up happening, and the same chaos, the same abuse, the same conflict. I would suggest, moving. When you find that novelty is wearing off, before you allow yourself to move into a space of being reactive and recreating old dramas because now you're not present anymore, while you're still present and you're feeling that excitement, that novelty wearing down, go away and do something. Go away from that person. Connect with somebody else. Even if it's somebody you know. Someone you've been friends with for years. If you haven't seen them in a while, connect with them. The novelty of that experience, the fact that it's fresh, you haven't seen them in a while, and you're reconnecting, that will anchor you into the present again. Which means that conflict that you just had with your significant other after the honeymoon period, that traumatic situation, a lot of the time when people experience trauma, they just talk to people about it, but they don't do it to release and gain perspective and understand and heal. Often we'll go there to get people to agree with what we believe, to tell people our version of the things, to give some skewed version of their interpretation, the other person's perspective in our conflict. But really it's about having people echo back what we believe and saying, yeah, you poor thing, yeah, you don't deserve that. Yeah, whatever you're thinking now is the appropriate way to respond. I second that. You deserve and you feel you're entitled to do that. That's what people do. That's why I call it an echo chamber. There's a difference between sharing and connecting and releasing and venting and sitting in an echo chamber after having a conflict with a friend or a partner and having these people consolidate your bias and consolidate your lopsided point of view. And, especially I've met so many people that it's so overwhelming for them to deal with confrontation that they will have a greater majority of the conversation that should be had between us. Because that's our business, it's our problem, it's our conflict. Resolution will be achieved if we communicate and receive each other with respect and love. But this can be overwhelming. People will cut off, and they will continue that conversation with others. And this not only further creates more bias in their point of view, but it removes them from being present enough in truth to be in the middle of the other person, to really see that other person, to really hear that other person, to really be open to believing what the other person is trying to share. Okay? If you've developed all this bias with your friends and all this talking, and then you come back and say, well, I want to continue that discussion that I walked out on at the beginning of last time, you're not really going to continue a discussion. You're coming back to tell them what you know. Because your friends, my friends support me, even my friends said this is right, even my friends said I was justified to think like this, to act like this. So you're there to make a case and to close the case. And that's acting out of fear. It's acting out of control. Okay? As opposed to being in a conflict and being open to discussing. If it's too overwhelming, saying, let's take some space. I might, call somebody up just to let them know how I'm feeling and try to be neutral about it. But I'm not going to gossip. I'm not going to fortify my point of view and just so people can agree with me. I want to return to this with you before we dilute it with all this other stuff, with all this bias. I want to return to it when we are both calm and centered and receiving, so we can communicate and resolve this. Okay? And that's the thing. People will, like I said, react by diverting away, and that feeds into the trauma, that feeds into... If you don't do that, if you have a conflict with somebody, here's my advice. If you feel really uprooted and unsettled, even to the worst extreme, take a bit of time away, do something, whether it's making music, cooking, fucking. Probably not fucking, because you probably won't just want to be like, I know we just had a fight, but can we fuck? Even though that can be great. You probably don't want to fuck someone else just because you had an argument, but do something which makes you feel immersed and present. And guess what you've done now? Just after you've had a conflict, you've gone, you've done a jog around the park, you've gone swimming, you've created something, you've talked with somebody else and just played with somebody else and connected. Instead of what we typically do after an argument, where we just kind of go over everything in our head and we really deepen the trenches of our thoughts and our feelings. And we, like I said, 99% of the trauma that we have and the fears that we have are shadows of the real thing. But those shadows keep growing and elongating the more that we feed these 1% problems that have actually happened, and they grow inside our mind, and they cast a bigger shadow, and that shadow obscures the light. That shadow covers the grounds of our mind, and it makes it harder for us to have much room at all to think positive thoughts, to keep ourselves light. Because we keep, after every conflict, going to this reactive mode of fixating on the conflict and making the situation a lot bigger in our minds than it actually is. So instead of doing that, whenever you feel triggered in the worst way, go and do something that makes you feel present. Because when you are present, you're no longer reacting, you're no longer thinking about the past and dwelling and fixating and adding to the trauma and making the situation worse than it is. You're not worrying about the future. When you're present, that nabs it at the bud. That stops those weeds growing. You're not watering it anymore. Instead, you've said, okay, this situation is toxic, there's too much conflict here or abuse, whatever. I'm going to move my energy, my watering can, somewhere else. And I don't want to keep feeding what's happened right at this moment, because that's just going to make that weed, that toxic, poisonous weed, grow. Instead, I'm going to water something that makes me happy, makes me feel inspired, makes me feel healed. I'm going to water something which will allow me to feel present and immersed. And like I said, that can be connection through people, connection through art, connection even through meditation, but meditation can be hard to separate those intrusive thoughts and trying to be in a place of stillness. So that's why I think, like, people, they'll go into these relationships, they'll have this honeymoon period, and then when that dies, instead of realizing that, you know, they have the option of moving their energy and their awareness into different spaces with different things and achieving connection, which will ground them again, bring them into presence, and then they can come back and resolve the problems that come up and experience those healing opportunities and growth opportunities. People will instead be like, well, you know, I had the novelty, I had that excitement that made me feel present and made me believe that there was hope and love and I could be vulnerable and have faith. But now things are familiar again. I'm leaning back into my old ways. Now I'm just going to leave this relationship out of fear. I'm going to abandon it and find something else, a new relationship entirely. That's novel, that's new, that provides that same feeling of being anchored in the present, just by the weight of enthusiasm and mystery. And I think every time happens, there is a certain amount of healing achieved. Because every time you move from a different connection to another connection, that brings you back into that space of presence. Like I said, presence is where you are aware, and then you can proceed with progress and proactive response, instead of going into your mind, left or right, back, past or future, and reacting from fear and conditioning. Okay? So I think a lot of the time these people that go from relationship to relationship, that might be necessary for their healing. They might feel like, okay, yep, I got the novelty from this new connection. The honeymoon period's dead now. I'm going back into not being present. I'm going to go somewhere else, new relationship. And then that brings them back into their present because it's so exciting. And there's a bit more healing. And every time the walls start to drop, the turrets start to come off the wall. And, the thing is, if people stay in that dynamic, once the familiarity starts breeding contempt, that's when the walls can start to build up again. That's when the turrets can start to be developed even further and adding on extra arsenal in the name of defense and security and fear. And I think my partner and I, we had so much growth, so much healing and opportunities and confrontations. And to begin with, it was invigorating as we were growing from it and learning more. But I feel we didn't really allow enough space or time and connection with other sources. So it just became more of the same, more of the same. We started seeing through our lenses of our traumas and our past and reacting not to the present, but time traveling and reacting from our past through the other person. And any healing we achieved, we still have maintained our growth, but any healing we achieved in the beginning, I think those walls have come up again, maybe even more than before, I'm not sure. But there's a point where you've got to acknowledge where you're in a space of healing and those walls are coming down, and when you notice that you're starting to feel triggered more often, when you're not in the present anymore as often and you're moving into a space of fear and fixation and intrusive thinking, I would say you don't necessarily need to leave the relationship for good. It might just be as simple as taking a break, or as simple as literally going and seeing a different friend, moving into a different space just for a day, even just for a couple of hours over a coffee, and allow yourself to be stimulated by something new so that there's no room to reflect on that which is old and behind you. And then you can return when you're centered, when you feel lighter, more healed. So that's the thing. If you're staying in the same space, doing the same thing, experiencing wounds, how do you expect any healing to occur by not doing anything differently? You're just going to be compiling your wounds and your wounds and your wounds. So before those wounds get too deep, and before you start reacting and gossiping or fixating and really strengthening the severity of those wounds, deepening the wounds, I would suggest cutting that off, doing something which makes you present, makes you immersed, and allow yourself to release, allow yourself to return to the present, to surrender to that, to open up again, to feel vulnerable again, open-minded again, not closed off, fight or flight and fear, but open with a will to understand and accept and even embrace and love. And then return to the conflicts. Hi, Racine, how are you? So that's the download, that's the thought, that, I think presence is where it's at in terms of our healing. And if we don't heal ourselves when we are wounded, we will become wounders. And we will naturally wound other people. And that's the difference between someone who's got healthy narcissism and unhealthy narcissism is, if you let your wounds grow over you without healing and you keep reacting and you're not changing things up so that you can be present and not fixate on things, but keep getting more energy and keep being more vulnerable because you're not just focused on that one source of pain all the time. You're allowing yourself to latch onto something else whenever things get too hard. I'm not talking about escapism, but to a degree I am. Because sometimes we need to escape and put our energy elsewhere so that we don't get too burdened with this deepening darkness and heaviness. Okay? And I think, like I said, it's just about that. It's just about acknowledging that we all have wounds, but the world is bountiful in its supply of opportunities for healing, opportunities for support. And you can do a lot of this by yourself, and you can do a lot of it with other people. And I'd suggest that as hard as it can be to move beyond that fight or flight response based on fear that says, just close off and suppress this emotion, or run away and escape and completely ignore it, which is kind of what I'm saying to do, but there's an unhealthy version too. I would say to acknowledge things as they are happening in the present. Do what you can to help make the best outcome in any situation. If it's beyond your capacity to do this, without causing significant toxic harm to yourself, then move, put your energy somewhere else, keep yourself light, keep yourself loved, keep yourself vulnerable. Return to the situation. And only keep returning to those situations that cause you that stress, those people that cause you that harm. If the benefits outweigh the cost, if how good it is in serving you outweighs how negative it is, some things are worth fighting for. And the New Age belief is that if something is difficult or shadowy, get away from it and protect yourself. I would say that the best things in life are the things that are the hardest to maintain, even the hardest things to attain in the first place. And it's worth fighting for. It's worth getting your hands dirty so you can find those deeper levels of peace. But you just got to know how to pace yourself. You got to know when to take a break, reallocate your activity and your attention and your energy so you can maintain your innocence and not become corrupt, but maintain the purity and the lightness within you, and then come back as often as you need. Go away as often as you need. Come back as often as you need, until everything balances out and everything is light for everyone once again. Because we all have the capacity to heal, and you will not be in a position where you can heal any other single life form, truly, until you've achieved some level of healing within yourself. At least more healing than you have wounds. If you've got more wounds than you have healing, then you're a wounder. And you'll be wounding, which will be an opportunity for other people to learn. But just allow for the healing. Find the space that enables you to feel light. Because I got to be honest with you, this world needs more healers right now. That's not to say we don't need suffering and trauma. We need to be able to relate to each other and care. So the trauma helps with that. And people say I've been in these relationships of abuse and I wasted all these years. I'm like, nah, dog. I would say that you studied, that you invested years into direct experience and research of what these situations and these kind of people are like and these behaviors. And now you can help other people in similar situations being subjected to similar behaviors and people because you can relate to it. To me, it's research, it's study, and it's an investment because you've now got something of value from your experience that you can use to heal other people. And when we heal other people, once you get past that point where the majority of your being and your totality is less wounds and you've achieved more healing than you have wounds, that is the position. Even if you're only 51% towards being healed and 49% still latching onto old wounds. If you're on that end of the spectrum, that is the moment that you can start healing. And guess what happens when you heal other people? You heal yourself too. So that extra 49% on that scale to achieving deeper levels of healing and release and being more present and full of light and love is so much easier now. Because now not only do you have the power to be responsive to situations and not reactive and heal yourself and prevent extra damage from happening and adding to it, but you're now able to help other people too, which is going to just exponentially offer you deeper levels of healing, deeper levels of being able to help, deeper levels of healing. And I think that's the direction, I know that that's the direction that I choose to go. And ultimately it comes down to you and the choice you wish to make for yourself. Do you want to move towards the end of the spectrum that is fear and wounds and become a wounder? Or do you want to move towards the end of the spectrum that is love and healing and becoming a healer?